اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين نسألك التوفيق والهداية والأنوار والبركات والعفو والعافية يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله على سيد المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I extended the time. Initially I was having 1 hour to do the talk, but we extended at the last minute, so please forgive us and bear with us, as I realized that it was just not possible to cover this area in 1 hour. Partly because a lot of these ideas are something quite new that people may not have come across before. And there's no point doing something half-heartedly and then leaving people without much of an idea of what's happening. So inshallah we'll be going until about quarter to 4, up to 4 o'clock perhaps, when then Sheikh Imran Hosein inshallah will be live beaming in. Can I just get a quick show of hands? How many people have actually read the article about the Yakjut Makjut on the website? Yeah, so a couple of people. How many people have listened to Sheikh Imran Hosein's talks about Gog and Magog, Yakjut Makjut, or read any of his books about the subject? Yeah, a few people as well. Okay, inshallah. Now, whenever you bring a new idea or a new interpretation, there will always be a resistance to that initially, which is to be expected, especially when it's something of a matter of this deen, because the Prophet ﷺ warned very severely against bringing any new matter into this deen. So by the very nature of our traditional scholars are very conservative and will be very careful when any type of new interpretation or new thing comes in, and they will evaluate it very carefully and very critically. So bringing something new, as Sheikh Imran Hosein has done, is always something that is can be quite controversial to begin with. Now I'll give you some examples. Imam Al-Bukhari rahimahullah, he died a scholar who was actually outcast from the towns where he taught and lived. Imam Al-Bukhari, one of the greatest of our imams of our ummah, during his own lifetime his work was not widely accepted. He was rejected by many of the greatest scholars of his time. Why? He had brought something new, something completely new. What was that? He had collected only the Sahih into one place. No one previously had done that. None of the great hadith scholars had done that. They had been collecting and transmitting the hadith, Sahih, Hasan, Da'if, whatever was there, they would transmit with the isnads. So this was something radically new. He said, I'm going to compile a book where I'm going to put only the Sahih. This was rejected by many of the great scholars of his time and widely accepted after his death. He became widely accepted, his book. And there's many other examples. Imam Al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, his book Ihya Ulumuddin was burnt in certain places by the scholars of certain cities. So when you get people who are thinking and bringing something fresh or new, there will always be a resistance, and there will be a process of criticism, a process of discussion, and then it will be either accepted or rejected by the ummah. And that is the beauty of this ummah, that it's been protected from error. La tajtami'u ummati ala dalala. This community will never gather upon error. So there's many strong proofs about the ijma' of this ummah, the consensus of this ummah. So where all of the Muslims agree upon something, it becomes a qat'i, a definitive proof. So, you may have noticed, those who read the article, I didn't put on there Gog and Magog were the Vikings. Yeah? I crept it in, because if I'd put that, probably people would have looked at the title and said, Dr. Ridhwan's gone crazy like some of his patients. So it's something new. Today I'm not here to persuade you that Yakjut Makjut were the Vikings. The plan I have today is to describe to you the process of how I came to that conclusion, and then leave the rest up to you to think about it for yourselves and decide for yourselves. And it will be people like yourselves that will decide whether this is true or not true. Yeah? People who are tulab al-ilm, people who are students of knowledge, you're the people who will decide. And that's how this ummah always works. Yeah? And from the outset, I would clearly and categorically state that this may be completely wrong. This whole theory may be completely wrong. But there may be some benefits anyway in some of the research I did. Even if Yakjut Makjut are not the Vikings, there still may be benefit in some of the research I did regarding European civilization. So I'm going to take you through the journey itself. To do this, I'll start by saying, first of all, also, some people might say, what's the point of talking about Gog and Magog, Dajjal, signs of the last day? What's the point? How is it going to affect us? How does it change anything? I personally believe that is an error. That is an error. Because there's a very important reason why the Prophet ﷺ gave us the alamatu sa'a, the signs of the coming of the last day. And there's a very important reason why the Quran has also mentioned some of these alamat. About Yakjut Makjut, about the dabba, the beast that will come out, is in the Quran. Now, and the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam is one of the strong proofs that, if people probably know the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, Imam Nawawi puts a second hadith in his book, which is Sahih, in which Jibreel alayhi salam came to a group of Sahaba and came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam 5 questions. And this was a very unique and very powerful hadith, which is why it's considered one of the strong foundational hadiths of this religion, because it came right towards the end of the Prophet ﷺ's life. And secondly, it was one of the few occasions when the Sahaba that were with the Prophet ﷺ actually saw Jibreel alayhi salam. It was very rare for the Sahaba to actually see Jibreel alayhi salam. It's not easy to see a malak. It's not easy for a human being to bear the sight of Jibreel alayhi salam. So this was a unique occasion when Umar ibn Khattab and other Sahaba that were sitting with the Prophet ﷺ, they saw Jibreel alayhi salam, who had come in the form of a man. And Jibreel alayhi salam asked 5 questions. And after he asked the 5 questions, he went, and the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba, that was Jibreel, he came to teach you your deen. Ataakum yu'allimukum deenakum. He came to teach you your deen. So what does that tell us? That those 5 questions sum up and summarize our deen. Our whole deen, the deen of Islam. And 2 of those questions were related to the last day. In one of them he said, he asked about the last day itself, and the Prophet ﷺ said, the questioner knows no more than the question. And then the final question was, tell me some of the signs. Amaratiha, tell us some of the signs of the last day. And the Prophet ﷺ then mentioned 2 of the signs. So this indicates how important it is, the signs. These signs have been given to us so that we may recognize them when they come about. And so then we may understand the age we live in. You understand? So I would like to start, the topic today is Yakjut Makjut. We'd like to start by just mentioning the ayahs of Quran which mention the Yakjut Makjut. There's 2 places in the Quran where Yakjut and Makjut are mentioned explicitly. One is towards the end of Surah Al-Kahf, and one is in Surah Al-Anbiya, just 1 ayah. In Surah Al-Kahf there's a few ayahs which Sidi Omar recited earlier on. So I'm just going to, we've had the Arabic recitation, so I'll just get the English translation of those ayahs. This is very important because to understand about Yakjut Makjut or Gog and Magog, the Quran is obviously the primary source of knowledge before anything else. and then we will go to the Sahih Hadith, the strong Hadith. And when dealing with the last day and signs of the last day, be very careful where you have to go to the strongest sources first before you go to weaker sources. Because of the very nature of these signs. You know, the time we live in today, the age we live in, is such a puzzling and unique age that human beings haven't witnessed in our known history. We don't know what happened before, you know, what happened before thousands of years ago. But the history that we do know, we don't know of any other time when civilization has been the way it is now. Technology and the sort of lives that we live is something unprecedented that we never heard of before. So to understand this time, we have to really go to the strongest sources possible. And I say this because there are many, many weak hadith out there that will just confuse people. And they will confuse people. I don't say that there's no use in weak hadith, as our ulama have said. Weak hadith do not mean they're fabricated. We do use weak hadith and we take benefit from them. But when we come to alama to sa'a, to understand these things, we need to go to the strongest sources first. So what does the Quran say about Yakjut Makjut? So in Surah Al-Kahf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about a man called Dhul Qarnayn. Dhul Qarnayn, which literally in Arabic means the one who has two horns, or the translation that Sheikh Imran Hosein prefers is the man of two times. Because qarn can be horn and can also be a time, a century or an epoch or a time, an age. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Dhul Qarnayn, but He doesn't mention is he a prophet or was he a righteous man. So the ulama had discussion about that. I feel that the stronger opinion is that he was a prophet. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ataynahu min kulli shay'in sababa." That Allah gave this man a means to everything. A means to everything. So he was given immense power. So the Mufassirun say he was one of those people who was given a world dominion. One of those people who was given a world order. And then the Quran describes that he went towards the west. He went to the furthest west, where he was given power over those people in the furthest west. And then he traveled to the furthest east. Yeah? And then the Quran says, and this is where Yakjut Makjut come, then it says, then followed he another way. So first it says west, to Maghrib al-Shams means the furthest west, where the sun actually sets. Then Matli' al-Shams, to the furthest east, where the actual sun rises. And then he went another way, it doesn't say which direction. Yeah? Until he reached a tract between two mountains. Baina Saddain. Saddain actually is barriers. But this here means mountains, two mountains. He found beneath them a people who scarcely understood a word. Then they said, "O Dhul Qarnayn, the Yakjut and Makjut people do great mischief on the earth. Shall we render you a tribute in order that you may erect a barrier between us and them?" So these people that he found, they said to him that Yakjut and Makjut, they are creating a lot of corruption, mufsidun. They are creating a lot of destruction and corruption. We'll pay you if you will put a barrier between us and them. We'll pay you a tribute, meaning a regular, in other words, we'll recognize your sovereignty on the condition that you get rid of these people for us. Yeah? Indicating that Dhul Qarnayn was given massive power. The Quran says he found a people that could barely understand a word. But then the next ayah said, they said, "O Dhul Qarnayn, can you do this?" Now it's not clear that those people who could barely understand a word, was it those people who spoke to Dhul Qarnayn and asked him to put the barrier up? Or was it the Yakjut Makjut themselves are the ones that could barely understand a word? which is something that will come in my article later on. So he said then to them, Dhul Qarnayn said to these people, he said, what Allah has given me is better than what you can pay me. I don't want your money or your tribute. But however, I will help you. Yeah? Help me therefore with strength. I will erect a strong barrier between you and them. Bring me blocks of iron. At length, when he had filled up the space between the two steep mountain sides, he said, blow. Then when he had made it a fire, you blow on the fire, on the iron and the fire, he said, bring me that I may pour over it molten lead. Yeah? Or I believe in some translation may say copper, I'm not sure. So he built this barrier of iron and lead. Thus were they made powerless to scale it or dig through it. So they could not get through. The Yakjut and Makjut could not get past this barrier. They were shut off. He said, this is a mercy from my Lord, but when the promise of my Lord comes to pass, he will make it into dust. And the promise of my Lord is true. On that day, then Allah says, on that day we shall leave them to surge like waves on one another. This is the Yakjut and Makjut themselves. So I'll talk about later how the Vikings were people that not only fought and tried to colonize others, they were always fighting each other. They were always fighting each other. Yeah, so we will leave them to surge like waves one another. The trumpet will be blown and we shall collect them all together. So then the final day will come after these people are released. So that is the Surah Al-Kahf. The other reference in the Quran, it comes in Surah Al-Anbiya, just one ayah mentions them. And I'm going to read also the ayah before, because Sheikh Imran, which I'm going to explain soon, is one of the things that he's linked to the ayah before. And it actually does link grammatically to the ayah before anyway. So this is ayah number 95 and 96, Surah Al-Anbiya. وَحَرَامٌ عَلَى قَرْيَةٍ أَهْلَكْنَاهَا أَنَّهُمْ لَا يَرْجِعُونَ حَتَّى إِذَا فُتِحَتْ يَأْجُوجُ وَمَأْجُوجُ وَهُمْ مِنْ كُلِّ حَدَبٍ يَنْسِلُونَ. There is a prohibition upon a town which we have destroyed, that they will ever return, that they will never return, meaning the people of the town. They will never return until when Gog and Magog are released and they come down from every elevation. They come down from every elevation or every place. Okay, so these are the ayahs of Quran, first of all. Yeah? So this is the primary source of knowledge we have about Yakjut and Makjut. Secondly, we go to the Sahih Hadith, the strongest Hadith that are available to us. Now probably the strongest, or if not the strongest, or one of the strongest, is a hadith in Sahih Al-Bukhari narrated by 4 different Sahaba. Yeah. So not only is it the strongest of Sahih in Al-Bukhari, but it's also narrated from 4 different Sahaba, which makes it very, very strong. Perhaps even mutawatir. I haven't looked into whether it reaches a status of mutawatir, and that status can differ according to different scholars. But nevertheless, it's close to, or actually mutawatir, meaning of a definitive status in its transmission. In this hadith, what happens? We'll read the narration from Zainab bin Jahsh, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. She said, radiyallahu anha, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم دخل عليها فزعا. One day the Prophet ﷺ came to her fazi'an. Now pay attention to this very strong word to use with regard to the Prophet ﷺ. Very unusual to describe the Prophet ﷺ to be in a state of fazi', which means actually fear. Yeah? It means fear. Very unusual that the Prophet ﷺ would be described in such a state unless it was something to do with the Akhirah, or something of a tribulation of the Akhirah, you see. So, indicating that the fitna of Yakjut Makjut is ultimately a tribulation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the Prophet ﷺ doesn't fear anyone except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see what I mean? And what did the Prophet ﷺ say? He said, La ilaha illallah. First of all, taking the Shahada. Waylun lil Arab min sharrin iqtarab. Woe be to the Arabs from an evil that has come close. From an evil that has come close. Futiha al-yawm min radmi Yakjut wa Makjut mithlu hadhihi. He said, today a breach has occurred in the barrier of Yakjut wa Makjut like this. And he made a sign with his thumb and finger. قالت زينب بن جحش فقلت يا رسول الله أنهلك وفينا الصالحون. Zainab said to him, would we be destroyed while there are still righteous people amongst us? Would we be destroyed while there are righteous people amongst us? قال نعم إذا كثر الخبث. He said, yes, when the impurity becomes prominent or predominant. Impurity, meaning, corruption, badness amongst the Muslims themselves. When that becomes predominant, then you will be destroyed. Okay, what other hadith do we have in the Sahih? People are probably familiar with the hadith, a long hadith where the Prophet ﷺ talks about the coming of Dajjal. And then the coming of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. I won't talk about Dajjal because Sheikh Imran is going to be talking on that subject later. The coming of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. And in that hadith then the Prophet ﷺ says, when the Prophet Isa alayhi salam will come, he will destroy the Dajjal. And after the Dajjal has been killed, then Prophet Isa alayhi salam will live in peace with the Muslims. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send against them the Yakjut wa Makjut. He will send against Prophet Isa alayhi salam and the Muslims the Gog and Magog. And it says in that hadith that they will be given, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, I am sending certain of my slaves that no one is able to fight except me. These people will be given such a power, such a huge immense power, that no one but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can fight against. Yeah? So these are the main references in the Quran and the Sahih. Like I said, there are many weak hadith regarding Yakjut wa Makjut, we have to first go to the strongest sources for knowledge about these events that will take place. So this is the sort of background, this is the background that we had from the Quran and the Sahih. These things are mentioned. Many years ago I studied with one of my teachers, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, and he's someone, and the thing about the alamatu sa'a, these signs of the last day, they won't be understood except by people that Allah wishes for them to understand. They will not be understood except by people who have been given spiritual insight by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not claiming to be one of them, but I believe I sat with some people who had those insights. And Sheikh Hamza Yusuf is one of them. And he focused a lot on the alamatu sa'a, the signs of the last day. And you probably all may have heard of his talk about Dajjal and things like that. Now, one of the things I heard him say about Yakjut wa Makjut, however, Gog and Magog, he said, this is something I've reflected upon for a long time and really thought about. and I can't understand. I don't know. I can't give any, I've come to I'm confused. I don't know. I can't explain it. You understand? So that was my background on my understanding of Yakjut Makjut. So we're studying with my teachers. We accept what's in the Quran, we accept what's in the Sahih, but not necessarily we understand everything. And maybe some things will become more clear as time goes on. As is the nature of alamatu sa'a, they become manifest and become more clear as time goes on. So now, what happened next? I came across Sheikh Imran Hosein. Brother Omar, one of my friends who attends some of my classes, introduced me to Sheikh Imran Hosein. Yeah? You might have seen some of his videos. They're becoming quite popular now on YouTube and places like that. So I, with interest, listened to some of his talks. And my initial reaction was, no, this is too much, Like I said, this is natural when someone comes with something new. Your initial reaction is always going to be, and plus, because he was talking a lot about things that are going to happen. He has a lot of predictions about what will happen based on his understanding of those alamatu sa'a. And from my knowledge and my study, most people who make prediction is always wrong. Yeah? Trust me, I've seen very pious, very great sheikhs that I respect a lot, and they've said certain things will happen and the things didn't happen. It's part of the nature of the times we live in, part of the nature of the times we live in, where also perhaps time is distorted. The Prophet ﷺ talked about that, about time speeding up towards the end, so time itself becomes distorted. So when I first read Sheikh Imran's stuff, I was quite skeptical. I was very impressed with his knowledge about European history, about the rise of capitalism and the global economic system and the monetary system. I thought, mashallah, this is someone rare who has got such a deep understanding of this whole thing, But to do with his predictions about, Dajjal and things that will happen, I was very skeptical, I'd say, to begin with. Then what happened, some of the things, however, they sort of start going around in my head. And, I started thinking, actually, some of these things are making sense to me. For example, one of the things he says is that Yakjut and Makjut have already been released. We are now in the world order of Gog and Magog. This is the world order of Gog and Magog. So he said they were released at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So this was something new to me. I always thought they're going to come, Prophet Isa ﷺ comes, according to that hadith we mentioned earlier. So this was something new. This is like crazy. But what was his proof? What was his proofs? And this is the thing that convinced, and he's the first to say as well, don't take what I'm saying as, this is coming from ilham or revelation or anything. He said, these are just a theory, then here's the proof, evaluate for yourself. And that for me is a sign of a scholar. Many Muslims unfortunately have fallen into a type of Christian type of model of venerating saints and believing that certain people, whatever they say is almost just like wahi again. But the wahi stopped with the Prophet ﷺ. If there were any people that were going to be of that nature, they would have been the Sahaba. But you don't see that with the Sahaba. You don't see Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu saying something and everyone saying, yeah, we accept this from Sayyidina Umar, it must be true. No, you see the Sahaba questioning him. You see other people questioning him. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu stood up on the minbar and he said, if you see me going astray, what would you do? And one of the people in the audience lifted his sword over his head and said, we will straighten you with this, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. That was the way they were. The wahi stopped with the Prophet ﷺ. There is ilham, of course we know that from the hadith, But it's not like wahy. Someone who has ilham might not even know they have ilham. Okay, they have sort of an inspiration or something. So this for me was a sign of a true scholar who says, look, this is a theory, evaluate for yourself. Now what was his proofs why he said Yakjut Makjut have been released? First of all, that Sahih Hadith. Al-yawm futihat fi radmi Yakjut Makjut. Today, a breach has occurred in the barrier of Yakjut Makjut. Today, the Prophet ﷺ said. And what did Zainab say? She said, would we be destroyed? Would we be destroyed while there are righteous people amongst us? Now there's another hadith in Tirmidhi, which people may be aware of, in which it says every day Gog and Magog, they dig through the barrier until they nearly get through it, and then they go back, and when they come back the next day, the barrier is still gone back to its normal. So then they start digging again. Now that seems to contradict the idea that it's been broken. But what Imam Anwar Shah Kashmiri says in his commentary on this, one of the great scholars of the recent times, he says that hadith of Tirmidhi, we have to discard it because it contradicts what is more sahih, what is more stronger, which is the hadith in Sahih Al-Bukhari. Yeah, so that's a principle in hadith studies. If you find a conflict, apparently a conflict in hadith which cannot be resolved in any other way, we take obviously what is stronger, what are the stronger transmissions. And we already mentioned the ones in Bukhari are from the strongest possible type of hadith, because not only is it sahih, but it's multiple chains from different sahaba. And on top of that, the sahaba who narrate them are not obscure sahaba, they're well-known sahaba. There are also sahih hadith which come from certain sahaba, which maybe the sahaba is not very well known. He only narrates one or two hadith. The narrators of this hadith are people like Anas ibn Malik, some of the very prominent narrators from the sahaba. So Imam Anwar Shah Kashmiri, he says we don't, because he also takes the position that Gog and Magog were released at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And the way I actually found that is something I'd like to share with you. Because Imran Hosein, he said perhaps, he's the first one to come with this idea that Gog and Magog were released at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But he also mentioned a verse of Allama Iqbal, the famous poet and scholar from the Indian subcontinent, who has a verse of poetry which indicates that he may have also believed that Gog and Magog have already been released. The verse of poetry is, obviously in Urdu, but I'll just read the English. With cleverness or wisdom and prudence, this uproar, chaos cannot be delayed. Because وَقَدْ كُنْتُمْ بِهِ تَسْتَعْجِلُونَ, Gog and Magog all have been released. The Muslim eye will see the meaning of Yansilun. Yansilun is from the ayah where it says that Yakjut Makjut will come down from every place. Yansilun. So Imran Hosein, he says, look, this is Allama Iqbal. He probably also believed that Gog and Magog have been released. But apart from that, no one else has said this. However, I found Imam Anwar Shah Kashmiri has clearly takes the same position. And the way I found it was quite strange, alhamdulillah. I was actually, it came, by total complete chance. And obviously we don't believe in chance, but I actually wanted to read the commentary about Yakjut Makjut in Fathul Bari, the famous commentary on Sahih Al-Bukhari by Ibn Hajar Al-Asqalani. So I was going on to I have a database, computer database of all the hadith books and everything. And I was intending to look at Fathul Bari. But for some reason, which is a book that I refer to quite often for, you know, most famous commentary on Bukhari, for some reason in my head it came Faydul Bari, which is actually a commentary by Imam Anwar Shah Kashmiri, a scholar who died, I believe he died in the early 20th century. He was one of the great Imams of his time from the Indo-Pak subcontinent, famous for his hadith and Quran and etc. But I was not intending to look in his book at all. So I just clicked on Faydul Bari instead of Fathul Bari. And I opened up that and it said, you know, his thing, it said, Gog and Magog have been released during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. And he gave the same proof that Imran Hosein gives, these hadith, وَيْلٌ لِلْعَرَبْ مِنْ شَرٍ اقْتَرَبْ الْيَوْمْ فُتِحَ فِي رَدْمِ يَجُوجْ وَمَجُوجْ. So I was saying, subhanallah, you know, this actually quite strengthens the opinion of Sheikh Imran Hosein, because you have a great authority like Imam Anwar Shah Kashmiri. So that's in the article as well. Now, Imran Hosein, he was saying also that this is the world order of Gog and Magog that we're in now. This world order of you know, American European civilization. And he said, look, they've been given such a power that no one can fight except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as is mentioned in the hadith, that I will give them such a power that no one can fight except me. And that was something I was reflecting upon, and I'm thinking, you know, the more I thought about it, it made sense to me. Because that was something I had realized previously anyway, from my own studies. You know, I don't know if people may have read an article I wrote about jihad. That was something I had already known, that in Sharia, probably it's not even permissible to fight these people. According to Sharia, because you're not allowed to fight a people that could destroy you with a click of a few buttons. Yeah? Literally, they could destroy us, or destroy people who fight them, with a click of a few buttons. They choose not to. You know, they derogatorily call, you know, like the war in Afghanistan is like a low-intensity conflict for them. They actually term it a low-intensity conflict. You know, when the war first kicked off, it was a mid-intensity, but now it's gone to low-intensity, counterinsurgency. That's how they view these you know, the so-called jihads that are taking place against them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to all of those people who are fighting for His cause. But I mean, that was my conclusions I had already come to. You know, so that made sense to me. You know, that yes. But then the other thing, the very unique interpretation that Imran Hosein brought relates to the other ayahs of Quran where Yakjut Makjut are mentioned in Al-Anbiya. That was the one we read earlier. Haramun ala qaryatin ahlaknaha annahum la yarji'un. It is forbidden upon a town that we have destroyed that they will ever return. And now that could be read two ways. And the way I always used to read it, haramun ala qarya, could be any town. It could be any town, you know. It is haram upon any town that Allah has destroyed, that the people will ever return to the place that was destroyed, in other words. That was the way I read it, and most people read that ayah. Yeah. However, it can also mean a town. Instead of any town, it can also mean a town. Grammatically in the Arabic, both meanings are possible. It is forbidden or haram upon a town that we destroyed. And so Sheikh Imran Hosein, his theory, his interpretation is that this is a town, and that town is Jerusalem. And the people who were destroyed when that town was destroyed was the Jewish people. So they will never return to that town. Hatta idha futihat Yakjut Makjut. The next ayah says hatta, until Gog and Magog are released. وَهُمْ مِنْ كُلِّ حَدَبٍ يَنْسِلُونَ, and they come down from every place. So what Imran Hosein was saying, Gog and Magog, when the Jews went back to Jerusalem was a proof that Gog and Magog have already been released. It's linked. Now I was astounded when I first read this interpretation. I was absolutely astounded. Because you read the Quran, you read it a different way, but this was something amazing to me. And like I said, it was very skeptical as well. Yeah? But then, once again, reflecting upon it, Qarya, a town, is mentioned elsewhere in the Quran, referring to Jerusalem itself. It's mentioned elsewhere in the Quran, Qarya, Jerusalem is called Qarya elsewhere in the Quran. وَكَالَّذِي مَرَّ عَلَى قَرْيَةٍ وَهِيَ خَاوِيَةٌ عَلَى عُرُوشِهَا. Mentioning about another prophet previously, who had passed by the town of Jerusalem, and he had asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how would you bring this town back to life? So it's called Qarya itself, Jerusalem is called Qarya elsewhere in the Quran. So this was, the sort of thought processes that were going on. So he was saying, the Gog and Magog world order makes possible for the Jews to go back to Jerusalem, based on those two ayahs of Quran. Now, so I looked at the tafsir, hatta, until Gog and Magog are released. I looked at the tafsir, what do the Mufassirun say? And yeah, there it was. Hatta goes back to haramun ala qaryatin annahum la yarji'un. Grammatically, that hatta, until, goes back to the ayah before. That it is forbidden upon the people of a town that they will ever return until Gog and Magog are released. Now that was always interpreted, or the tafsir always was taught, it doesn't mean literally when Gog and Magog are released, it means that this will be a sign of Qiyamah. You see what I mean? So in other words, when Allah destroys any town, the people will never come back to that town until the Day of Judgment, in other words. But the ayah doesn't actually say that. It says, Hatta idha futiyat Yakjut Makjut, until Gog and Magog are released. It was taken as an interpretation that this must refer to the Day of Judgment. So, and then, you really have to read the books of Sheikh Imran here yourself to get the full impact of, because I read the books, and that's how I became more convinced about, because first of all, he talks a lot about why does Western Europe become obsessed with Jerusalem. Yeah? Why does Western Europe become obsessed with Jerusalem? You see what I mean? So he's linking it back to that. He's saying Western European civilization is the civilization of Gog and Magog. And can I please add, because I don't want to offend people, it doesn't mean that all European people or all white people are evil or Satans or anything like that. We don't have anything like that. Yakjut Makjut are human people. So as with all human people, they can get hidayah and tawfiq as well, some of them. But these are general characteristics of different races that we're talking about. General characteristics, doesn't apply to every individual. It's like we say, for example, let's say Persian people are very intelligent. Yeah, that's something our scholars used to say, that the Persians are very well noted for their intelligence. Does that mean if you go to Persia you won't find in Iran one single dumb person? No. These are general characteristics, so please don't in any way demonize any people. We don't demonize any people. These are just trying to understand historical process and understand the time we live in now. They can be good and bad from any people, And the whole point of the world order of Gog and Magog is many people will follow them as well, that are not from that particular background, that particular racial or genetic background. Many people will be part of that world order as well. So, why does Western Europe become obsessed with Jerusalem all of a sudden? Why does Britain, a secular country, suddenly start talking about getting the Holy Land and sending the Jews back to the Holy Land. Britain, a secular, this is in 20th century we're talking. Not when it was in Christianity back in the Middle Ages, we're talking about 20th century. When was Israel created?
1948.
47, 48, yeah? We're talking about, this is a Britain at the height of its secularism, at the height of its atheism, suddenly it becomes obsessed with the Holy Land, and we want to get the Jews back to the Holy Land. What's that all about? So this is what Sheikh Imran is saying, and this is what's going around in my mind. Like, actually, yeah, there's a point there, So it all starts with the Crusades. Suddenly, and the Crusades happen after the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So after the Prophet ﷺ said, today, Yakjut and Makjut have been released. Yeah? 3 centuries later, we see in Europe, suddenly Western Europe become obsessed with trying to take Jerusalem. They set out on all these crusades. This is not a Christian thing, because the main Christian power of the time was Byzantium, Eastern Rome. They had nothing to do with the crusades. In fact, they were very worried about the crusade, because crusaders actually looted and plundered them on the way to Jerusalem. So this is peculiar to Western Europe. This obsession for 300 years, the Crusades take place 300 years. Western Europe becomes obsessed with Jerusalem. They want to take Jerusalem. So think about that. I was thinking about that. I was thinking about those ayahs of Quran. Hatta idha futihat Yakjut Makjut. So this is how slowly I was getting slightly convinced. The third big thing, the new interpretation that Imran Hosein brought, is about Dajjal. The famous hadith about Dajjal, which is Sahih, that he will come for 40 days. The first day will be like 1 year, the second day like a month, the third day like a week, and the rest of the days will be like your days. Now what he said was, and this is once again novel interpretation, he said the day that will be like a year, and then a month, then a week, he will be in the unseen. And when he comes, the days that will be like your days, he will be in your realm, you'll see him as an individual. So once again, this is, But then, taking that further, he said the day that will be like a year is the time of the British Empire. The time when Britain is the ruling state in the world. And he will talk about this later, so I don't want to, but it's just to understand, the whole thing. The day that will be like a month is when America takes over as the ruling state of the world. And the day that will be like a week is when Israel takes over as the ruling state of the world, which is going to happen according to him. Prediction. And then after the period when Israel becomes the ruling state of the world, meaning the most powerful nation, the leading nation, we will see Dajjal, the individual, appear for the rest of those days. So once again I was like, subhanallah, this is like ajib, this is like strange stuff. Secondly, and he links it to the hadith of Tamim ad-Dari. You heard of the hadith of Tamim ad-Dari, the Sahih hadith in which one Sahaba, Tamim ad-Dari, he told the Prophet ﷺ, we were on a ship, we got lost on the sea for many days, and we ended up on the island, and on the island we found this hairy beast, and the hairy beast then took them to Dajjal. You understand? So Sheikh Imran Hosein said that island is Britain. So this was something obviously completely new as well. So the island was Britain. That's why the day that is like a year, Britain is the ruling state. That's where Dajjal starts. Then he moves to America, he moves to Israel, and then he will become manifest to the human eye. So once again, this was, just over months probably. I was just reflecting upon some of those things, thinking, I can see some sense there. Just historically, the historical process about Britain, the British Empire, the colonialism, and how then America takes over in the 20th century, as a leading state. And then Israel's going to take over. I was more skeptical about that. I didn't see Israel as such a powerful country. But then, so what he said was, for Israel to then take over, it will have to have a massive expansion of its territory. Because it's such a small country, it doesn't have the actual territorial base to be the leading nation of the world. It needs to have a massive expansion of its territory. It needs to have wars against its Arab neighbors. And this is the thing that really made me start taking Sheikh Imran more seriously, is because he predicted the Arab uprisings. He predicted the Arab uprisings. You know, and when Sidi Umar showed me some of his videos, you know, this was before the Arab uprising, so I saw him talking about that. And he said, you know, that there will be a series of massive uprisings in the Arab countries. He said this is all instigated, social engineering. You put in the Arab countries these TV channels like Al Jazeera, continuously feeding them pictures of how they're being killed, how their people are being oppressed. Continuously showing pictures of Palestinians being killed and oppressed. You're rising the anger, the feeling of the masses. So he said this is being done purposely. Because Israel needs those wars, it wants to expand its territory. But it doesn't want to be seen as the aggressor. So how will that come about? You will have uprisings in the Arab world, you have these democratic movements that come about. Anyone could have predicted, if democracy comes to the Arab countries, the Ikhwan al-Muslimin are going to come into power. Anyone could have predicted that. Yeah? Americans knew very well that it's going to happen. The Ikhwan al-Muslimin will come into power. What's the Ikhwan al-Muslimin going to do? They're going to obviously be taking a very pro-American stance and trying to be friendly and everything, because they realize where power lies. They realize they're not going to come into power without the powerful nations of the world backing them. But by the very nature of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin or Muslim Islamic type of parties that will come in, they will be very, very focused against helping their Palestinian brothers. Any Muslim would be. And all of us are. You know, what more concern can we have than the oppression that's happening against the Palestinians? So that will lead to a hostility against Israel. That would not be possible with those dictators, which were obviously very friendly. So then Israel will start using that hostility, justifying what it wants to actually do, which is to wage war against those Arab neighbors and expand its territory massively. So this is the things he was saying before the Arab uprisings took place. Then the Arab uprisings took place. And then I really took him more seriously. Before that it was all very much, you know, this is very much predictions about the future and all that, you know. Because, you know, my own knowledge of politics, I like to think of myself as dabbling in politics and political science. You can't predict things. You can not predict things. So then I started taking it more seriously, and I was like, subhanAllah, you know, it actually makes sense. Why did the Americans and the West start supporting those pro-democracy movements in those countries? But the explanation that Sheikh Imran is given is, I would say it makes sense, but if it is true, very ominous indeed, because it means there's social engineering taking place at such a scale that's unprecedented. You know, how people are controlling our masses through media, through Al Jazeera channels and these other channels, how they're controlling our masses. Okay, I'll just keep glancing at the time because I realize I need to. This is the background. This is the background now. So Sheikh Imran is saying, Yakjut Makjut are released at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Some others like Imam Anwar Shah Kashmiri has also said this. Yeah, based on the Sahih Hadith. He's also saying that the Jews don't return to Jerusalem until the Gog and Magog are released. Why do Western Europe become so obsessed with Jerusalem during the Crusades? And then during this last century, when did the Jews actually return? When Britain and its allies won the First World War. And what did they do? They defeated the Ottomans. So the Khilafah al-Islamiyah, the Islamic Caliphate, came to an end after 1,423 or 24 years. A very huge event, you know. Britain and its allies put an end to the Islamic Khilafah. When they put an end to Islam, what did they do? They took Jerusalem. And then suddenly, so that is a signal for the world order, the Gog and Magog world order being established. When the Khilafah finishes, at the end of the First World War, Britain and its allies divide up the Ottoman lands. They take Jerusalem. The Gog and Magog world order is established. The Jews are then sent back to Jerusalem. So, some parts of Sheikh Imran's thing I didn't find convincing. Like, he says the Gog and Magog were the Khazar people. The Khazar people, near the Caucasus region. These people were a tribe of Turkic origins that converted to Judaism. They converted to Judaism. Yeah. Soon after the time of the Prophet ﷺ. When they were faced with the Muslims on one side and the Christians on the other side, they converted to Judaism. And then later on they sort of disappeared from history. So people saying, you know, they sort of infiltrated into Western Europe, and they were the Yakjut Makjut people. So this I didn't find convincing, because if you look at the description of Yakjut Makjut, they're behind a barrier. They're trapped behind a barrier. The Khazar people were from the Caucasus region. There's, you know, so Sheikh Imran Hosein was saying there was probably a barrier between these certain mountains. Yeah? But what about the other directions? What about the three other directions? There was nothing to stop them from moving out. So I never really found that convincing. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to go for everything, but inshallah we'll do what we can in the time that remains. No, sorry, you don't need to. I can see the time. What happened next? I was reading a book by Christopher Walker, Islam and the West. Yeah? Highly recommended book. He talks about the entire history of the relationship between Islam and the West, and from the time of Sayyidina Umar until today. And he's a very fair dealing of the subject, you know, not at all anti-Islam or anything like that. I'll read you the passage that I came across that triggered off my investigations about the Vikings. So he says in his book Islam and the West, he's talking about the Crusades. He was saying, why did the Crusades suddenly come about? You know, it was a massive thing in Western Europe. It was a massive phenomenon. Not in the rest of the world. The Islamic world barely noticed the Crusades. We nowadays have become more obsessed than our ancestors were. In the Islamic world, the Crusades were barely noticed, trust me. They took it to very small areas around the coast, and they were soon taken back. We now are putting more prominence to the Crusades because we are now dominated by Western Europe, so it's sort of rewriting our own history. At the time, the Crusades for us were not a big deal. In Western Europe, they were massive. They literally gripped the whole of Western Europe for 3 centuries, this idea of going and getting Jerusalem from the infidels. So Christopher Walker, he's saying, you know, how did the Crusades come about? He says, within Europe, a number of elements changed the prevalent attitude from peaceful pilgrimage to violent conquest of the Holy Land. Because before that time, Europeans had been coming peacefully and doing pilgrimage in Jerusalem. There was no problem. Muslims were more than happy to have Jewish people, Christians, anyone, coming to do their pilgrimage, staying in the city. With very, very, very minor exceptions, the Muslims were very accommodating. So he's asking the question, why suddenly then Western Europe becomes so hostile towards Jerusalem, towards the Muslims? There's no really reason for it. So he says there's 3 elements. The first was the coming of the Normans. This people, originally from Scandinavia, had within 2 generations remodeled itself as a dominant force within the society of Europe. They were assertive, dictatorial, controlling and militant, though sometimes content to act as mercenaries. These people, the Vikings and their descendants, the Normans, they're pragmatists. Okay? They liked social hierarchies. They weren't people of equality, everyone's equal. They liked social hierarchies. We're better, those people are low caste, we're high caste, that type of approach. If they could not be dominant, they were content with submission with a tendency towards warfare. They were pragmatists. They were happy if there's somewhere we can't take by force, we'll work with that. They seem not to have rated equality highly, but they were greater agents for change, perhaps as a result of their instincts for violence and hierarchy. They made their militant cause popular by gaining, where necessary, the blessing of the Pope, but were unafraid of excommunication. In other words, they used Christianity for military and power interests. They were happy to become Christian if it was help them to get into positions of power, but they were also happy to disobey the Pope if the need arose. They were hypocrites, in other words. That's one of their deep-seated attributes of these people, is they're people of not of faith. They're people of deep kufr. They used the papacy as they saw fit, and the papacy made use of them. When William the Conqueror invaded England in 1066, his army was led by a knight carrying a papal banner emblazoned with a red cross. The invasion of England thus took on the appearance of a crusade before the Crusades. In dating the capture of Jerusalem, in brackets, the event preferable to all events. The event preferable to all events, the capture of Jerusalem. Why are they obsessed with Jerusalem? You see? Fulcher of Charters made a point of indicating that it occurred 12 years after the death of William, King of England. So there's a link here between the Normans, between England, and between the Crusades. So when I read this passage, this particular passage, it triggered these thoughts in my head, which hopefully triggering in your head, as I've told you the background to where I was coming from, right? So I was thinking, interesting, because why were Western Europe becoming so obsessed with the Holy Land? Okay, so who are these guys, the Normans, that suddenly have come up, right? They've come to prominence, to power in major centers of Europe, especially Britain. Remember going back to also Dajjal and Britain, yeah? So they've come to power. These people then suddenly are instigating this violence towards Jerusalem. So I think probably for a few weeks that was just rolling around in my head. And then I decided, let me check out who are these guys, the Normans, Could they possibly be Yakjut Makjut? I thought to myself. So, I just done the normal thing, Google search, yeah? Ask Sheikh Google. And it says, they were descended from the Vikings. Like he said as well, they came from Scandinavia. These people were descended from the Vikings, the Normans. Yeah? And they came from the furthest north, from Norway. So now I was thinking, okay, about Dhul Qarnayn going to the west, then to the east, north. I looked in the tafsir, Imam Fakhruddin Ar-Razi, he said he went north. Even though the Quran doesn't say that, the Mufassirun, they believe that he went north next, the third direction. So these guys, the Vikings, I started then reading about the Vikings. They came from the furthest north, northwestern point, right? And what were historians saying about them? They said it was unexplained how they exploded upon Western Europe. They suddenly emerged from their homeland in a massive pouring out of people, and they start invading and plundering neighboring countries like Britain, Ireland, Scotland, and those areas of Europe as well that were next to that, you know, to the coast. France, parts of Germany. But so what historians were saying was, it's really unexplainable. Historians have been unable to explain why the Vikings suddenly gushed forth from their home place in such huge numbers. So when did this happen, I thought to myself. The first attacks took place on the northeastern coast of Britain about 150 years after the Prophet ﷺ. Yeah? So this is when they suddenly start pouring out. Yeah? 150 years after the Prophet ﷺ said, Yakjut and Makjut there's been a breach in their wall. Suddenly these people from the furthest north. Yeah? And the other thing was that Norway is so far north that it's very cold, obviously. But other places that are the same northern latitude are much colder, and you can't really live there, like Alaska, Greenland, Siberia. They're much colder on the same north. So it's actually the most northern place that you can actually live. And why? Because there's a certain current in the ocean called the Gulf Stream, which actually moderates the climate there, keeps it more habitable for human beings. So in a way, it literally is the most northern place that people could live, you know, apart from Eskimos or, you know, people who live in igloos or something. So I was thinking, subhanAllah, that's strange, you know, the timing is right, the place. Let me look on the map. Is there any mountains up there? You know? So you look at the map, look at Google Earth or look at a map of the Earth, yeah? What do you see? Running along the whole of Norway, a massive chain of mountains. A massive range of mountains all the way across the country. So if you were trapped behind those mountains, you couldn't go in any direction because you have the sea, you have the North Pole literally behind you. You understand? The other thing then I also found was those mountains are particularly difficult to get over. Why? More difficult than normal mountains. Why? Because remember we said the moderating effect of the Gulf Stream is there. That moderates the climate. But as soon as you start climbing those mountains, you lose that effect of that ocean, of the ocean nearby, and it becomes very freezing, like Siberian, Alaskan levels. So you can't go over those mountains. You can only go through. Obviously, if there's a way through, you can go through. So if that way through were to be blocked, it would be a formidable barrier to people that were trapped on the other side of the mountains. Other things I found, the Viking chiefs themselves, historical reports that we have, they were saying, you know, one of them reported that he was from the furthest north of all the Northmen. Because they became called Northmen, you know, people from the north. These Vikings from the north. They were from, he said, I was from the furthest north. So in other words, from beyond the mountains. You understand? So this is the process I was going through. Okay? I was thinking, subhanAllah, this is ajib. Okay? Then I came to the end of what I could do through Google. So I went to a university in London, where I'm studying at the moment, and I went to their library, and I went to the Scandinavian section, and I spent quite a long time, many days, in that area, reading through a lot of stuff to try to figure out more about these people, the Vikings, where they came from, what do we know about their history, what do we know about their ancient history, not much is known about them. Yeah? When they burst upon European stage, about 150 years after the Prophet ﷺ, there was no history known about them. Yeah? The people at the time, like in Britain, the Christians who were in Britain, France, Germany, they were Christian countries. They described them as barbarians, infidels, pagans that have come. You know, pagans mean idol worshippers. And some of them even said these are Gog and Magog that have been prophesied in their Christian books. He said these are the people from the north, the pagans from the north, that were prophesied to come at the end of time. Yeah. So these people were coming down. They only started writing their history about 100, 200 years after that time. So we don't have written historical records about them. The early time. We know about later on when it... And that time, that 300 years after they first attacked Britain, became known as the Viking Age. The Viking Age. That just indicates to us how powerful and how prominent they were in Western Europe and Northern Europe at that time, during those 300 years. Yeah? So it becomes known as the Viking Age. So they were coming out in thousands. Please obviously read the article when you have time. It's on the website, West London School of Islamic Studies website. I can't go through everything that's in the article today. I'm just giving you some things from there that we have time to do. We will definitely stop for Sheikh Imran by 4 inshallah. So read the article, and I haven't put everything in the article either that I found. So this is the Viking Age. Now hundreds, thousands of these people are pouring out from the most northern part of Europe, Scandinavia, what's now called Norway and Sweden, and Denmark as well. Yeah? They're pouring out in their ships. They're attacking, plundering, looting. You know about the Vikings, yeah? They're notorious. They settle in certain places as well. Over those 300 years is a long time. It's a long time. Think about it. You know, I won't read, you know, there's descriptions from Europeans of the time about the Vikings and, you know, what was going on, so you can read them yourself. How they were going into Paris, into, you know, the rest of France, into Germany, and especially the island of Britain and the surrounding islands of Britain. So Ireland, that was the main place they were always attacking. Sometimes they would settle, sometimes they would go back with their plunder. So this process takes over 300 years. It's the Viking Age. Like I said, historians till today can't explain how did these sudden thousands and millions come out from this place all of a sudden at that particular juncture in history. Some theories have been proposed, but none have been found historical evidence for that. Some historians said it was because they invented those ships that they were able to then, you understand? But there's no evidence that they invented those ships. Why would they invent them at that particular time? Also, some said it was population explosion. Yeah. Once again, no evidence for that though. There was something else, and then I found a very interesting one particular book in that library, which actually paints a picture of what happened in that area around about the same time as the Prophet ﷺ. Because remember, now we're talking prehistory. There's no written records. This is stuff they're piecing together through archaeological evidence. What was happening in the 7th century when the Prophet ﷺ lived in the 7th century? You know, if we're saying Gog and Magog were released at that time, what was happening in Norway and Sweden at that time? We don't know really, but there's, you know, they've tried to put together a story. So this one person, a historian called Jesh, right? I'll read you what she's wrote. First of all, she says, the Scandinavian peninsula in early medieval times. Early medieval is time of the Prophet, Medieval period starts just after the time of the Prophet ﷺ. In early medieval times, as well as today, was ethnically and culturally a dual region, with a Sami minority speaking a language of the Uralian group and a majority Germanic group. So the Sami were the northern group, while the Germanic ethnic group inhabited the southern regions of modern-day Sweden. So first of all, she's saying in Norway and Sweden there's two different peoples. Two different peoples, ethnically and culturally different. You understand? So this goes back to the Quran, which mentions that Dhul Qarnayn, when he came across those people, there was two of them. There was one people that said to Dhul Qarnayn, protect us against Yakjut Makjut. So that also added to the picture, you know, that these are historians that are saying there's always been two different, ethnically and culturally different people, speaking different languages as well. Now the other thing that happened, the same author, she says, something very significant happened to the people of that area of Scandinavia during the period of the late 6th to 7th century. Remember we said the Prophet ﷺ lived in the early 7th century. Early 7th century. So this is around the time of the Prophet ﷺ. She says something very significant happened to the society, to the culture. What happened? She actually put a subtitle in the chapter, The Change. The change. The whole society changed all of a sudden. Yeah? So she says, before this change, the Scandinavian farming societies, they lived and farmed peacefully, with a certain type of economic system based on redistribution of. They had a farming agricultural society and a certain type of economy, and they were peaceful. They had no expansion or thoughts of expansion or invasion. Suddenly, around about this time of the Prophet ﷺ, this change takes place. Yeah? The extensive farming system was abandoned, and the cultural landscape slowly changed. The whole culture changes. This is based on archaeological evidence of the type of houses they had, the type of animals they were keeping, the type of burials that were taking place, and all of that. When the previous farming economy collapsed, a large number of families left their homes. What happened to them and their animals? All we know is that in many regions the farms were never rebuilt, and people never returned to their homeland and ancestral graves. These people just disappeared, and a different type of people have taken over. So this is the same time Prophet ﷺ is saying Yakjut Makjut have been released. These people in Scandinavia, in Sweden, have been erased, and the new people have taken over there. What characterizes the new people? This same historian Jesh, she says, a different landscape emerged on the Scandinavian peninsula. By 700, so by 700 after the Prophet ﷺ, the houses of the settlements were smaller. They had room for fewer animals. Only special people were buried now. Previously everyone would be buried. So now it becomes a hierarchical caste system, you see. An intensified agriculture had taken the place of the former extensive system, etc., etc. New families come into power. Emergence of memorial forms and a stratum of landholders who strive to acquire as much land as possible is characteristic. So now you have these new people there that are more interested in acquiring more and more land. Okay. Should we do this for the next 5-10 minutes before Sheikh Imran comes? Should we just have any questions? Because even, I'm afraid, 1.5 hours wasn't really enough to cover the thing in depth. But hopefully, inshallah, you got enough idea. So please read the article, or come and speak to me if you want to have more for discussion on this later. Is there any questions people have got just for the last few minutes that we could possibly focus the discussion more?
It's quite a large geographical area, isn't it, between Norway and Sweden and Scandinavia? Have you pinpointed the exact location? Because it's either on Sweden or Norway, isn't it? So
yeah, basically, good question. Basically, the mountains, the Norwegian mountains, basically stretch across the whole of Norway in a northeasterly direction. You know the shape of the country is like this, isn't it? So the mountains stretch all the way across, basically. If you go around the north to get around the mountains, you're going to get into like Alaskan type of temperatures, you know, so it makes it uninhabitable. Where was the actual barrier? You know, I have not identified that. I have, you know, I wouldn't say I've looked into it in depth, but part of the thing is, you know, like I said, this is just a theory. I'm not here to convince people about this. I'm just here to put it out, what I've discovered. And actually, I don't want to spend my life trying to convince people and researching that Gog and Magog were the Vikings in case I'm wrong. I also have other things to do. So, Allahu Alam, you know, but I'm just saying, you know, these are all the things I came across that just made me feel overwhelmed in believing that they were. Sorry, yeah.
Was it the Germanic people that attacked Germany, or was it
It was the other people, you see, the northern people. It's very unclear because, like I said, it was prehistory. There's no written records until written records start about 200 years after the Vikings first start invading. So a lot of it is based on conjecture as well. Yeah.
So the Gog and Magog are coming at the end of time, is that correct?
Yep.
But the Vikings were over 1,000 years ago, so...
Yeah.
Oh,
excellent question, yes. This is dealt with in the article. Unfortunately, I haven't got much time to deal with it, but I'll quickly mention, very good question. This is obviously the obvious question, yeah? Gog and Magog will come at the end of time, they will fight against Prophet Isa alayhi salam. So this is what Sheikh Imran Hosein is also, you know, his theory is that they were released at that time, but their descendants come generation after generation. It is Western European civilization. Yeah? It is the world order that we're in now, the European world order. Yeah? America is the progeny of Europe. Yeah? They're white, Caucasian Europeans, their descendants. This world order is the world order of Gog and Magog. It comes over this whole period. Now, how can this be? Yeah? First of all, Imam Anwar Shah Kashmiri also holds this position. So he says, it's like the Khawarij. Yeah? You know Khawarij, you heard of them? They're a deviant sect that come in Islam. They come generation after generation, again and again. So similarly with Yakjut Makjut, that was the initial release of the people. And please do read the article, I can't explain in so many few minutes, but that was the initial release of the Gog and Magog, but it's their progeny, it's their descendants that come. After the Viking Age, 300 years, what happens? Some of the Vikings that settled in Normandy in northern France, within 2 generations they changed their name from Vikings or Northmen and start calling themselves Normans. Normans. Why did they do this? They were very embarrassed about their past. Vikings, you know, who wants to be related to Vikings? You understand? Vikings throughout the whole of Europe had become known as barbarians, pirates, plunderers, the worst type of people. So these Normans, now when these Vikings start settling in different places, in Britain, in France, they want to shake off their lineage. So these Normans, they start taking on the titles of the French nobility. So they start styling themselves as dukes. The Viking nobility, they were known as earls. So earls still, they do survive. So these guys, they start calling themselves dukes and counts. You know, so they're trying to shake off their lineage. Then they invade England. Yeah, the Normans invade England. William the Conqueror invades England. So they establish themselves. The previous Anglo-Saxon people that were in southern England are pushed aside. Within a few decades, all of the land-owning aristocracy, the vast majority, over 90%, has become Norman. So from Viking descent. Queen Elizabeth II is from Norman descent, from the Vikings. So what happens next? They establish themselves in Britain. They're established in Normandy. They're also established in some of the other power centers in Europe, like southern Italy. What happens next in Europe? Suddenly the Crusades start. Look at the historical map, 300 years Viking Age, literally 300 years Crusades. Europe then sinks into 300 years of sending people on missions to free Jerusalem. It becomes obsessed with Jerusalem. Yeah? What happens after the Crusades? You start coming into, like 14th century, 15th century. So we're starting off now, the beginning of the rise of Europe. The rise of Europe as a world power. The beginning, the seeds of the colonialism are sown at that time. So British ships start sailing around in all directions to look for lands to colonize. The voyages of discovery start taking place. What those British people are doing is exactly what the Vikings were doing. The Vikings were people that were sending ships in all directions, looking for lands to colonize, looking for places that they could get quick money, places they could plunder. Remember, they're pragmatists. They're not typical invaders who go around trying to set up a world civilization or an empire. They're pragmatists, they're mercenaries, they're opportunists.
By the way, what's that word you said?
Which one?
Pragmatist.
Pragmatist.
Yeah, what does it mean?
Pragmatist is someone who takes opportunities and someone who doesn't necessarily act according to ideals,
Yeah.
but acts according to where he assesses his benefit to lie.
Practical.
Practical, yeah, practical. Well, you could, yeah, in a way they're practical. So, there's certain people that will be fighting for an ideology, would be it whatever, a religion, a Marxism or whatever, and they will be prepared to die for that, They don't care if they win or not, they're fighting for an idea. These people they're not fighting for any ideology, they're fighting for money and land. So, that's the timeline. And then European civilization starts. So these people from Britain are sending out ships, looking for lands to colonize, looking for places to trade. And then you come into the European colonial period. Yeah. So that's when does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them a power that no one can fight against except for Him? Is when they're given this military technology through science and technology. Yeah, so now they've been given certain weapons that we just simply, people are unable to fight against. Yeah? Any other questions? Got 5 minutes. Inshallah.
Quick. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Just to your point about the Khazars, some people have said that most of the Ashkenazi or Western Jewry are descendants of the Turkic Khazars. That's why some people hold that view. Would you
That's
like
right, yeah.
to comment on that? And the Ashkenazi Jews were dominant in Zionism
Yep.
and establishing Israel as opposed to the Sephardic Jews who lived in Iran, Iraq, and other Arab countries.
Correct, so yeah, like I said, I'm quite aware of those theories. I never found it that convincing simply because of some of the other geographical issues. The place where they came from was not a place that was barriered off from other people. Even if there was a wall in like Sheikh Imran says, in the Darial Gorge, there was a wall between these Caucasus Mountains. What about the other three directions, north, east and west? So there was nothing to stop them from moving. So that's why I didn't quite accept that. Secondly, some of the stuff that people mention about the Ashkenazi Jews, it is quite conjectural as well. It's not hard proven fact, historical fact, and other people have different opinions. So that was basically why I felt, when I started reading about these Vikings, I felt were much stronger. And I think Sheikh Imran, he hasn't taken it on yet, But I think it makes sense, because all I've done is add one thing to really Sheikh Imran's theories, which is why I spent some time talking about some of his ideas, which is actually identifying who Yakjut Makjut were. The way that they come, at that time of the Prophet ﷺ, but they still come at the end of time. There's other things in my article you can read. For example, in the Quran itself, it says, وَهُمْ مِنْ كُلِّ حَدَبٍ يَنْسِلُونَ, that Gog and Magog, they will come from every hadab, every elevation. In other words, world order. They're everywhere. They will be in every part of the world. You understand? This is Quran, don't forget. This is our primary source. Hum min kulli hadabin yansilun. What does the word yansilun mean? Because I was thinking the same thing myself. How can they come like 1,000 years ago? And now. I really reflected a lot about that. And then I thought about that word, the ayah, yansilun. That word, they will come down from every elevation. What's the root meaning of yansilun? The root. Arabic always has three roots. Nasal. Nasal. People who know Urdu will know the same word is in Urdu. It's the same in Arabic. It actually means progeny. It means children. The root of it. So how does it mean come down? Yansilun is because when a mother gives birth, her baby comes down. So that's why it says in the Quran, Hum min kulli hadabin yansilun, they will come down from every high place. So they will establish this world order. But for me, that also indicated nasal, you see. There was a sign there for me that this is progeny, they're descendants. They're the descendants of Yakjut Makjut. And the other thing I mentioned in the article is look at Ibrahim alayhi salam in the Quran. Ibrahim alayhi salam makes a dua, Oh Allah, Ibrahim and Ismail alayhi salam, they make dua, Oh Allah, make from our progeny a believing nation. When did that progeny come? Over 2,000 years later. The Prophet ﷺ and his ummah. So within the Quran, there's other evidence that, people can be attached to ancestors or descendants of over 1,000 years. Okay, inshallah, I think we can still carry on if there's any other questions. Yeah.
Besides the Vikings, who's the other candidates for the Gog and Magog?
For me, I don't find any other candidates. Like I said, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, one of the teachers I studied with, he really said, I've reflected on it so much. And he was well aware of the Khazar theory as well. And he said, I don't find any, I can't give any explanation about it, So in my mind, I don't have any other candidates.
There's lots of potential people out there, aren't there, who are...
Historically, for example, when the Mongols, Genghis Khan came about, the Muslims said this is Gog and Magog. So historically, when things happen, people would sometimes, point to certain people, but then after 2 generations, they became Muslims, so that didn't seem to be a feasible theory. Some people say maybe the Chinese, the Great Wall of China as well. Some people say that, but speculation. Yeah. To get Sheikh Hamza to read something like this is practically impossible. I have sent him a copy, so to get people to get the time to read it. This is why I said the people who will accept or reject will be you, brothers, students of knowledge. To get scholars to read things is very difficult because they tend to be very busy. When they find, there's thousands of Muslims now are suddenly following this idea that Gog and Magog are the Vikings, then the scholars will turn their attention to it and say, let's have a look at this. Yeah.
All right, up to whether we debate it was the Vikings or the Khazarian kingdom, but they took control of Europe, and Europe was a launching pad.
Yes.
So up to a point, isn't it like almost immaterial, whether it's Sheikh Imran's argument, which is prevalent, or the one you're putting forward? We all agree that Europe has been taken over, and Europe is being used for another agenda. Or is it really important that we have to find out if it's to do with the Vikings or the...
No, I think that's a very good point. But obviously, not everyone agrees that European civilization is Gog and Magog. Don't forget, this is Sheikh Imran's theory, you see. So I think by identifying the Vikings, it strengthens that rest of the jigsaw. It's like a piece in a jigsaw, you see. Because when someone's going to read about Khazars and they're not going to be convinced, then the rest of the whole thing also becomes unconvincing, you see what I mean? About Europeans being so. From that aspect, it may be of some importance. to just give that missing, the missing link to the whole picture.